right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call to order the January 9th, 2023 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission for the City of Universal City, Texas. Could we have a check to see that we have a quorum, please, Mr. Casada?
Okay, Commissioner Carlson.
Here.
Commissioner Andrews.
Here.
Commissioner Garcia. Commissioner Hernandez.
Here.
Commissioner Hudson.
Here.
Commissioner Spurlock.
Here.
Commissioner Villa.
Here.
Commissioner Woods.
Here.
Chair Jackson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay. Next item is the minutes of the previous meeting, the December 22, 2022 meeting. You've all been provided with copies of the minutes of that meeting. Do we have any typographical errors or anything that needs to be restructured before we take a motion for approval? Okay, can I get a motion to approve those minutes then?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second. Seconded. Any discussion? Can we have a vote, please, Mr. McSally?
Commissioner Andrews.
Aye.
Commissioner Hudson.
Aye.
Commissioner Carlson.
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia. Commissioner Hernandez.
Aye.
Commissioner Spurlock.
Aye.
Commissioner Villa.
Aye.
Commissioner Woods.
Aye.
Chair Jackson.
Aye.
Minutes are approved.
Okay, moving on to new business. We have only one proposal before us tonight, but it's a complex issue. It requires us to address it in 4 steps. Before we begin the public hearings that are required for these steps, could I ask Mr. Casada to give us an overview of the proposal?
Yes, sir. So this is a project for 2902 Pat Booker Road. It's a PUD proposal. The applicant, White Conley, is proposing an apartment complex on the 14-acre vacant unsubdivided tract of land. Formerly, it was a junkyard, as you may be aware. In order to move forward, they are requesting a future land use plan amendment from CS&O Commercial Services to HDR, High Density Residential. A zone change from C3 Commercial Services to PUD 2023-101 District, preliminary and final PUD plan approval, and preliminary plat of subdivision approval. Just to note that if they are granted approval, they'll have to come back for the final plat of subdivision approval at a later date. It's my understanding they are working out some issues with TxDOT and CPS, and that is why there's a hold at this point. Back in July of 2022, staff originally met with the applicant to discuss the proposed project, and we worked with them on issues including density, setbacks, access, buffering adjacent neighbors, and architectural design and / building materials. In September of 2022, they did make a presentation, concept level presentation to City Council, and they did receive overwhelming positive feedback. I'll just go over some of the project specifics. It's an apartment complex, multifamily housing on the 14 acres, 268 units. That density comes to just under 20 units per acre. So it does meet the underlying zone, which would be an R5 district for multifamily, which is 20 units per acre. They're at 19.28 units per acre. They're providing 486 parking spaces. The code requires 470, so they do exceed that. They're providing various amenities, including a clubhouse, pool, and a dog park. Exterior building materials are a combination of stone veneer, lap siding, and board and batten. And the mean height on the 3-story buildings is 38 feet. They are proposing to accommodate 10 buildings total, residential buildings total. 7 3-story and 3 2-story buildings. Some of the other proposed development regulations that we worked with them on, we want to ensure that there was an adequate buffer to reduce the impact as much as possible to the adjacent, especially the adjacent residential neighbors. So, for example, for the mobile homes to the north, the distance between the closest mobile home and one of the apartment buildings is about 110 feet approximately. The single-family homes to the east, there are 3 different distances based on the different buildings. And those include 115 feet, 150 feet, and 250 feet approximately. One of the things that the developer did do at the city's request was consider the location of a detention pond in order to increase the buffer between the residences and the apartment complex. And that's what they did, which is depicted in the packet in the site plan. The impervious cover is approximately 53%. The code does allow 65% for this project. They are proposing a combination of 6-foot and 8-foot fencing depending on the location. The 8-foot fencing would be adjacent to the residential neighbors. Downward lighting will be provided, and we encourage them to try and reach as close as possible 0-foot candles at the lot line, again, to mitigate the impact to those adjacent residential neighbors. And they have pretty much succeeded on that. And there's an exhibit in your packet that demonstrates that. Utilities, they worked with Public Works on the location of water, sewer, and power lines. Again, that's depicted on an exhibit in your packet. And then landscaping, 25% minimum of the entire subject property needs to be landscaped, with 40% of that 25% being located in the front yard. We asked them to keep as many trees as possible, existing trees, and they have done that. There's an exhibit that shows the number of trees to be removed and the number of trees that are going to stay. And I think they indicated on their exhibit, those that have a 4-inch caliber and greater are indicated on that plan. In addition to those items for landscaping, they're going to provide a minimum 15-foot average landscape buffer around the perimeter. Again, encourage them to try and mitigate that impact to the residential neighbors. Combination of trees, shrubs, ground cover, and succulents will be consistent with the proposed plant palette that's identified in the packet. So as part of the building permit application, they will provide a final landscape plan that will be consistent with the regulations provided in the ordinance if it's adopted. And then they're proposing one monument sign, 12-foot maximum height. We did allow for 2. It is a very wide tract of land, so if they do decide at some point to put an additional monument sign, if they do get those 2 curb cuts that they're requesting, that's a possibility. Then they would just have to go through a building permit submittal process with that second sign. But it would have to meet the 12-foot height requirement. They did conduct a traffic analysis. In a nutshell, the proposed project, again, 268 units, would generate, at full build-out, approximately 1,800 additional vehicle trips per day, which is approximately a 6% increase throughout the entire course of the day to today. When we talk about AM and PM peak hours, that's less than a 1% increase. Staff did send out 85 legal notices to adjacent property owners within 200 feet of the subject property. We received 1 response from one of the single-family residences. They were in opposition to the proposed development. And also included in your packet, because this is a planned unit development, they do have to comply with the standards for a planned unit development. They did address or respond to each of those standards within the packet. Those would be the findings of fact when it goes to City Council. Kim and I are certainly here to answer any additional questions. The applicant would like to make a presentation. We do have several residents that would also like to make a comment as well.
Should we do that in the first public hearing?
Yes, sir.
All right. As Mr. Casada mentioned, there are 4 individual steps that have to be completed to approve totally the package. The first is to change the future land use plan for the city, because you can't rezone property without first making it align with the future land use plan. That will be the first item that we address, is the change to the future land use plan. But that does require a public hearing. Second be the actual rezoning of the property, the motion to rezone. And that will also require a public hearing. Third will be approval, review and approval of the planned unit development. The findings of fact that Mr. Casella addressed earlier. And then fourth is the preliminary plat of this subdivision. That requires a public meeting, which is basically the same thing. At each public, basically we're addressing the same issue 4 times is what it amounts to. So we might as well go ahead and address the issues in the first public hearing. That is the change to the future land use plan. Now, before we open the public hearing, Mr. Casella, can you just briefly discuss the future land use plan, and for those that might not be familiar with it?
Sure. So the future land use plan is a guide for future development for land uses, which is then, when you go further down to the details, you have your zoning map. So future land use plan provides the guide, the zoning map provides the details. They have to request, because of the zoning, the PUB request, we need to change both the zoning from commercial and the FLUP, or the future land use plan, to meet this type of use, high density residential. So we're requesting both of those changes.
All right. So the first item we're going to address is the public hearing for PC 560, which is a request for an amendment to the future land use plan for this lot at 2902 Pat Booker Road, which will permit it to go from CS+O, commercial services and overlay, to high density residential per zoning ordinance 581. I'd like to call that public hearing to order at this time. You said that the developer would like to make a presentation.
Yes, sir.
Then let's have that first. Give us your name and address, please.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ashley Fairman. My address is 10101 Reunion Place. I work with a law firm called Kaufman and Killing Griffin in Fairmont. We are land use attorneys that specialize in zoning and land development. I do want to introduce, we have a whole group of people here to make a presentation and answer questions. First, introduce Kevin White with White Conley Builders, and also Austin Moran with White Conley. Kevin Kowalski is here, Chris Kowalski, excuse me, is here with Pate Dawson Engineers, who's a civil engineer for the project. And then we also have the broker for the project, Phil Crate. So I'll go through this presentation. Warning in advance, there are 49 slides, but I'm going to go through them relatively quickly. I do want to thank you all for your time. I also want to thank Kim and Michael for being here. As Michael mentioned, we've been working on this project since last summer. And instead of just a straight multifamily zoning request, we have gone the PUD option. And the reason to do that is we feel that it's important to provide the city with certainty as to what's going to be developed. So the PUD locks in that design, locks in the development, which we're going to show you today. As Michael mentioned, here's the site. It's almost 14 acres of Pat Booker Road. Generally the location there. And again, what we're asking for is that PUD that will lock in that site plan, the lighting, the building design, everything that goes along with the project. So here's generally the concept plan. You can see Pat Booker here is on the left, and then here are the buildings. There's several different types of buildings, so I'm going to show you a few different designs. But one thing I do want to point out that Michael mentioned is one of the things that has been done in design is to make sure those buildings are moved as far off of the shared residential, single family, and the manufactured homes property lines as possible, so to pull those back. So all of those buildings are at least over 100 feet off of the property line.
Could you identify which of those buildings are the 2-story, which are the 3-story? I had trouble pulling that out of the package.
Yes, sure. So this building here is the clubhouse. Here's the entrance from Pat Booker. This building here is 2-story, and that is more of a, sorry, I didn't know it's touchscreen. That is more of a townhome type concept. And White Conley, I didn't mention, but White Conley has been in this business for quite some time, San Antonio based, in the area. And this is a type of product that has been very successful. So it has its own yard, and it gives people the two-story option. So this is two-story unit here, this is a two-story building here, as well as this one. So the longer, narrow one. The buildings that are a little bit wider, these are the 3 stories.
Thank you.
Sure. Oh no, sorry, okay. So this is one of the building types, and you'll see a few different iterations of this 3-story building as well as the 2 stories. But these are included in the PUD because there are the different building types, and so there's different designs that we need to provide to the city as part of that PUD application. And it is the mixture of materials, the stone and the siding, and we can get into more of that, and Kevin can certainly speak to all of design if there are questions. And again, different building type here. And this is the 2-story option. So there's the front doors and then there's the back yards on the other side of this building, which you can see here. This exhibit was provided just to show that detention pond and that location in the back corner. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but these are all the architectural requirements that go along with the buildings that we would be required to meet if the PUD is approved and then in the building permit application. It's pretty technical. And then this is just a breakdown of the different types of units. Is it 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, and how big those units are. We did include this slide in the presentation. This shows some of the other apartment complexes that are in Universal City. The reason we wanted to include this is one, if you can look at the density on this side, the project density is relatively low compared to all of these others, which most of them are over 20 units per the acre. We're at 19.2. And then also most of these projects are much older. The most recently built was 2006. So this project would be new product, and we think very nice. And also I do want to mention it's a market rate project. So what that means is it's not a subsidized project, it's not a tax credit project. So the idea here is to attract the people who want to live in Universal City, who choose to live in apartments, and choose to have that renter lifestyle, which is pretty popular. So here's a landscape exhibit, and we'll get into the details of this, but what this shows is the landscape buffer surrounding the property as well as the open space that will be throughout.
Could I get you to address the retention pond just for a second?
Yes.
I realize it's not going to have standing water in it. There just isn't any standing water.
No, the idea is to collect the water and then it slowly drains out.
So it's basically a depression.
Yes.
It'll be dry.
And grass.
Dry and just grass, and then it'll flood during heavy rains.
It will hold water during the heavy rain.
Yeah.
And Chris, it's designed to drain within 24 hours?
I think because it's 24 to 48 hours, one to one touches.
Yeah, so
Drained
Drain.
where?
non-storm periods, it's just going to be
Which channel?
a
Green belt.
green belt.
Oh,
Yes.
Just to the right of it, you'll see those cluster of trees kind of funnel into a channel. Right there.
Yeah.
And then, as Michael mentioned, we do have the allowance for 1 monument sign. This is what it would look like. And actually, the PUD allows for 2, but right this time we're only proposing this 1. Here's some of this renderings of the green space that'll be throughout the property. And then we did include this exhibit to show kind of what that open space, what the common space for the apartment project will look like. So there's multiple courtyards, dog parks, the passive green area, just open space. We have the pool amenities, and then as well as the courtyard. This is a fencing exhibit. So what's proposed is the new 8-foot wooden fence around the majority of the site. This is Pat Hooker. Sorry. That's easier, actually. So then a 6-foot wooden fence on this side, and then the front of the property, what you see from Pat Hooker would be an open metal fence.
I have a quick question. You
Yes,
talked about the retention ponds. When it drains, where does the water go?
It goes to this drainage area here.
Okay. So it goes into a natural drain?
It's a drainage easement.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And then we included these from the landscape architect to show some exhibits, kind of the idea, the concept, what's the landscaping going to look like, and what's the general feel of the project, and then specifically the type of landscaping and the type of plants that would be included. This is an exhibit that shows utilities. So I'm going to just, it's a little complicated. If there are any specific questions about the utilities, we can try to address those, but this is just where those utility lines will be located. This is fire access, so you can see the fire lane here on this. And this also shows, again, a little bit challenging to see, but it does provide those setbacks from the property line. So here we have, for example, this, you can look right here, this corner of the building, that's almost 110 feet off of that project, or that property line. And with the PUD, we can't get closer to that. So by including these exhibits in the site plan with this application, it guarantees that setback. Impervious cover, I know Michael went through this, but right now it's just under 53% for the site, so about half of the site will remain green or open space. And then this is slightly different than the impervious cover exhibit, but what this shows is common open space. So what's the space where residents can go and be outside? So is that the pool space, or is that a courtyard, or is that a playground? That's kind of what this exhibit demonstrates.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
We want to know if he could ask a question.
Yeah, once he can make a public comment, throw it out there.
Oh, okay.
So again, I don't want to be too repetitive, but traffic was studied and was considered, and we can answer questions on that if there are any about the peak hour trips or how site access will work and status with TxDOT. Downward lighting, so we know downward lighting is very important. This exhibit is really hard to see unless you're looking really closely, but the idea of this is to show and to guarantee that light doesn't spill over. So it rates kind of what lighting you have in what location, and is it lit or is it not lit. And so this shows that the lighting will be downward facing and shielded, so we can't go over the property lines and kind of where that light is focused. And then what also we do in the PUD is include the different types of fixtures to guarantee that downward lighting. And then here we just have some renderings, exhibits of kind of what the project will look like. So this is a leasing amenity center. This is generally the look. This is actually very similar to another project White Conley has worked on. And this is an existing clubhouse from another project as well. Also what this clubhouse for this specific location will be based on. This is just the tenant space and gym within that clubhouse. Survey, contour map, if there are any questions about contours. And then lastly, this is that exhibit that Michael mentioned about trees. So what this exhibit shows is trees on site. The yellow are the trees that will be removed, and then the green are the trees that will stay. So with the goal being all of the trees along the boundaries to remain, as well as the frontage. We know that the trees fronting on Pat Booker, that the city had planted those. So in trying to keep all of those, as many as possible as well. So if there are any questions about trees, happy to answer those as well. So with that, I'm going to stop, but we are happy to answer any questions about the project, about site design, engineering, anything to help with the request. So thank you.
The those of us that have been around for a while know that this used to be a junkyard.
Yes, sir.
And I frankly always heard the rumor that it would be an EPA nightmare to build on that because of the leakage from various junk vehicles. I just wondered if you could address how that's been resolved or how you stand on it.
Yeah, I'll introduce Kevin White and he can help answer, but a phase 1 and a phase 2 environmental study have been completed for the property to know that it is safe to build on and to know what types of remediation, if any, are needed.
So just like Ashley, first off, I'm Kevin White with my comment. A phase 1 and phase 2 environmental study has been done on the property. We're working with those environmental engineers. There's nothing that either one of those 2 studies has found that would prevent us from moving forward. There was a couple of items that were noted on the phase 2 that we are working on addressing with the estate to make sure that those are rectified so that development can continue on it, but nothing from a testing level exceeded anything that would be required to be reported to the state or require extensive environmental cleanup. And we're in the process of evaluating it as we speak, but more than likely, if anything, there would be a little bit of fill that would be coming in for the site. That's what we're looking at. So a lot of the subsurface soils that did not even have any significant environmental concerns based off those studies aren't going to be heavily excavated or transported off site, at least in plan right now.
Okay. Okay, do the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission have any further questions for the developers at this point? All right, thank you. At this point, I want to continue the public hearing. And I have a list of those that have been asked to address. If I call your name, I'd ask you to come up and give your name and address. Please limit your comments to less than 5 minutes. And if you try to go past 5 minutes, I will ask you to step back down, please. Okay, the first person that's asked to speak is Billy Duncon, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to address it?
Yes, I would.
Okay, name and address, please.
Billy Jean Duncan Jr., address 2910 Cotton River Road, Buckingham Village Mobile Home Park, Lot 16. My concern was just a couple. When she was going over her presentation about the retaining pond, I've lived in that location for 15 years. In the 15 years, I've had 3 floods. They came right up to my house, right up to my home. Heavy rain for 2 days straight. Doesn't happen all the time. And my concern would be, since they're going to strip all that dirt away and drain it towards the retention pond, I live over here, but that street comes straight down that way, straight towards me. If that pond ever overflows or wherever, that would be my concern. They probably figured, okay, whatever land or whatever amount, the retention pond should be able to hold it. I'm just worried about that part. So, but I live on a mobile home, but I have to level every 3 years because of rain, this, that, stuff like that. That would be one thing. My second, making an apartment complex right there. It's great for the area, the businesses, more people, more money, not a problem. But it's also can also bring in crime. That's another thing. Universal City, 15 years, never had a problem with crime. Police are doing their job, that's great. I'm hoping this doesn't cause that problem. When new people come in, 1 or 2, no problem. This is a whole development area. That can bring in problems. I'm concerned about that. I'm also concerned that the apartment complex is going to make my taxes go up also as well. It's going to bring in, new housing, which will probably increase my taxes. My taxes are high enough. But those are concerns I have.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Second person that asked to address the commission. Cohen Young?
Cohen Young. How you
I'm
doing?
sorry, I just couldn't read your first name.
No, it's okay, sorry.
Give me your name and address, please.
Cohen Anthony Young, 8702 Stony Brook Drive.
Okay.
One of my concerns is
When where's Stony Brook with relation to this? I mean, is it one of the residential areas that backs
Yes,
onto that
residential.
area?
yes.
Yeah, okay, I'm just,
So
sorry.
I'm just curious of when they did the study, checking traffic and everything, because it might not seem like a big thing, but it depends. Did you do it during the school year, or did you do it like early part? Because as you all know, traffic is totally different once school starts. It's a totally different thing. 35, running down here, because you got the base and everything. A lot of people go to school. When school's out, it's totally different. If you're gonna do an assessment of that, you do it in the fall, you do it in the spring. If you did it in the summertime, it's not gonna show you how busy that road is gonna be. Number two, was the traffic lights. Where's the traffic light? Are they gonna add an additional traffic light or something? What's that gonna be? How's that, again, that's gonna impact traffic and things like that. And
I just tell you, we're gonna discuss that.
okay, and then, because those are a lot of things that affect, I know they have to work with the, CPS and all that, and I'm just kind of curious, if things don't go well, what happens to this plan overall? So, if something doesn't get approved right now, okay, what's happened? Does this go to the next bidder? Has it changed? Does that, because once you say it's okay for a residential area, you change the zone, then who's to say what happens after? I'm just asking.
Yeah, I can address that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
You want me to address it now, or you want me to wait?
yeah, go ahead.
but I think that's all. I don't want to take up too much time. I just have a couple questions that I'm curious about.
Yeah, so on your second point, the beauty of the PUD, or the planned unit development, is that what is approved, these regulations and the site plan, the density, it's locked in. So compared to just straight R5 multifamily zoning, the scenario you laid out, if it were just R5 and they got approval and then they went away, and someone else can come in and they have that zoning in place, they can just put up apartment complexes. In this case, with the planning and development, it's specific to this design, this density, this product type. So if they were to get approval and then go away, the next person, the next group that comes in would have to follow these guidelines unless they want to go through it all on their own again.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Young.
You're welcome.
Cliff Faggot?
Yes,
Address,
Cliff.
please.
Cliff Figget, 8727 Stony Brook Drive.
Okay.
Just have concerns about traffic increase, talked about maybe a traffic light or something. The green belt erosion in the back, how fast will that drain? Will that cause erosion? Because that would definitely affect my residents. And who will manage the apartments?
All right, Savannah Nixon?
I don't have any comments at this
All right.
time. Thank you.
Kevin White? Oh, that's Kevin, I'm sorry. Okay, and then Chris Kowalski? How about
I'm
Jan?
an engineer at the
Yeah,
time.
Jan Mitchell? Yes.
Jan Mitchell, I live on 205 Devaka, not close to here, but I do a lot of walking
In the area,
around here. Yeah. I've lived here for over 20 years, and I've noticed that traffic along Pat Booker is just steadily increasing along, the Walmart in, H-E-B in since I've been here. And Pat Booker's just getting crazier and crazier. I think it's gonna be a lot more traffic than the traffic planners estimated in that area. I mean, I go by there, walk by there, and there's lines of cars over there by that Buckingham street over there, going to the mobile home park. That's number one. I think you're gonna have a lot more traffic than you think there is. And there's already a line. If you go at certain times, there's a line, because sometimes I go through back by old John Chick's place and get on Pat Booker and try to go over to the mall or whatever, and the line is back way far, if y'all have ever been there, I'm sure y'all have all done it, but in 268 residences, maybe one or two of those, each one of them has people that might be working. There's going to be a lot of people coming in and out of that entrance there and exit there. So I think that's going to be more of an issue than the planners proposed in their favor, of course. The other thing is, on the multi-use plan, the city's multi-use, or I forget what y'all called it, but I was wondering if there's a reason why almost all of Pat Booker is commercial zoned. I mean, almost the whole thing is commercial. So there's a couple of old apartment complexes along Pat Booker, but most of it's commercial, right?
Yep.
So there must have been a reason why the original planners said, let's make this all commercial, versus having a nice new apartment complex coming out onto Pat Booker. I mean, everybody, all the other ones that are along there are kind of, you have to kind of go out a side street and come out off of a side street. I think there's going to be some big problems with traffic, trying to people kind of coming out of there turning left, going onto Pat Booker without a light, or is there going to be a light in there? We're going to talk about that, but 3 lights right there in a row is going to be kind of crazy too. So that's just my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the only people I had that have signed up to address the meeting. Is there anyone else here that would like to make a public statement, address the committee? Okay. Michael, if we have further questions for the developer, should we do it during the public hearing?
I think so, that'd be appropriate.
Okay. All right. My question is on, we'll all have the opportunity, but my question is on the traffic, as these gentlemen and lady have addressed. These are going to be attractive apartments, and they will attract many of the denizens of Randolph Air Force Base. Expect a substantial population from Randolph in your apartments. And I have visions of the left turn lanes trying to turn out of these apartments and head to Randolph at 6:30 to 7:30 in the morning. It's already difficult to make a left turn on Pat Booker Road, and we're talking perhaps a few hundred cars trying to make a left turn across there. And I read the traffic study that's in your packet, and it's chock full of the word TxDOT could do this or could do that. There's no answer for what would be done. Should be done. Could you address whether you expect traffic lights or they also address a right in, right out, which I don't understand.
So turns in and out, right turn out only, left turn.
Right turn out only, right turn in only.
So in that scenario, you wouldn't be able to cross and.
Yeah, would not be able to cross, correct.
Now, a lot of people gonna wanna cross.
Right.
That's true. From inside that apartment complex, heading east on Pat Booker Road. I wonder if you all could address the traffic situation.
So, yeah, I'll take the field of that one for the moment. So, right now, that the information that's provided to the committee that's included in this exhibit is based off what traffic engineers expect, based off initial conversations and known conversations with TxDOT. We know that Pat Booker Road is a TxDOT controlled road. They're going to dictate what improvements have to be done accordingly, whether it be something like a traffic signal or even right turn, right out based off of what the trip counts are and what the volume is on that. So we're part of the phrasing that they use in that is because they and us are a little bit at behest of what TxDOT dictates to happen because it is a TxDOT controlled road. There are some things that, based off of trip counts, we know and we will expect, and that's what a lot of what has been included. That traffic analysis conversation scope with TxDOT is a very extended, very long process. and that is begun with the work that we've done now, but that is ongoing. That's why we can't necessarily speak to final findings with that. But based off the number of units and the trip counts, that is known data. The other thing that I would like to say relative to that is if this was commercial property, based off of the square footage of this particular tract and what could be put on it from a commercial perspective, the traffic analysis data would be 3 times the trip count of what multifamily is for this unit count. So there would be a very potentially much more significant impact to the surrounding residents and community that utilizes Pat Booker if this was all commercial property as it's currently zoned right now, and if it was developed as such. It's actually a slightly less trip count for the multifamily perspective on that front. And tying that into some of the comments that were made, a commercial development of the sort that would fill up this acre level to potentially be a large box store with the parking that would go with it, and it would significantly exceed a 52% impervious cover criteria that we feel like that we would be at with the apartments that we're proposing right now from a density perspective. So therefore, volume, flood control downstream, things that would have to be addressed with the pond and the resulting impact on the surrounding community would be significantly greater from an impervious cover and therefore drainage and improvements that would need to be done if it was a commercial development on top of the traffic as well, based off of the size development that we're proposing.
And the other thing I do want to add is that what we're seeing a lot with multifamily projects, similar to people who live in single-family projects, is that people leave their homes at different times of the day, particularly if more people working from home now. So it's not car leaving at 7 a.m. They're spread out throughout the day. So with a lot of residents either working from home or the business center at the clubhouse.
Most of the people at Randolph don't work at home. So basically, we don't know what the traffic situation is going to be, whether it be lights or some sort of medians or change to the, what they call it, the two-way left turn strip, whatever they call it. We basically got a 5th lane running down the middle of Pat Booker.
Right.
We've talked in here about the problem we already have on that street, with people pulling out into that lane to get access to complete a left turn, which we were informed is illegal.
Yep.
But I see an awful lot of that gonna happen unless it's controlled somehow.
That's why they were talking about those built-up curbs that channel the traffic, so you couldn't do that.
It's okay, I got a 4-wheel drive.
I noticed that the Austin Highway, the city of San Antonio, or TxDOT, I'm not sure who it was, but they've put in concrete median strip.
Yeah, they have.
All the way up and down their center lane from Booker all the way down to Lanark. So they had the same problem with the apartment complexes there, and that's what happened there.
What was the right in and right out again? You brought it up, and that was a question of mine, but I didn't hear the answer to that.
What is it?
Explain it to me. Yes, please.
It very well may be dictated from TxDOT that we control the access from the standpoint of the shape of the driveways that would preclude turning left. For example, we're only right in. So if you are, for lack of better terms, going north on Pat Booker, you would turn right into the property, but it would, and you could come right out, continuing going toward 1604, but not necessarily be able to turn left and go south potentially.
Which is great
That would be right in, right out.
unless you work at Randolph Air Force.
Yeah, so you have to go down and then make a U-E.
That's an issue when you go to H-E-B or Walmart.
That's right.
So
Right
it's
now.
not just to go to work.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Are the curb brakes, are they fixed? Is that part of the fixed PUD,
It's.
where the curb breaks are?
TechStat is going to determine that. They have to get curb cuts from TechStat. Based on their initial discussions with them, this is what the proposal was. We believe that TechStat will likely grant them both. But at least one for sure.
So it's probably gonna be one across from Palisades and another one 305 feet, that being some sort of magic number.
Right, both ends of the development.
Yeah, the minimum is 315 feet, but right now they're shown as 500 feet apart.
Okay.
Spaces and traffic, not trying to creep a car through the turn.
All right. Members of the commission have any further questions before we close the public hearing?
I've got a few. So do you know how many cars each resident will be allowed to have?
So
on
it depends,
premises?
I mean,
Each family?
no, there is not a restriction necessarily for an individual partner. The current parking count is somewhere around a 1.8 ratio for the number of units. And that falls into what I would call the sweet spot, if not a little bit over what is typically done. Somewhere between 1.5 and 2 is typically in the window. 1.5 is pretty tight, because this is Texas and we all like to drive bigger vehicles, and more vehicles per household. Over 2, most municipalities' regulation 2 is typically a cap. So at 1.8, we're kind of in the middle there. The other thing I would point out on that front is just from a little bit of background, Ashley touched on it. But as a company, White County Village is based out of San Antonio. We've been doing multifamily development in Texas only since the early 70s. One of the things that not only just the parking count can be skewed, but where that distribution on the complex parking is. One of the things I feel pretty strongly about with this site plan is the distribution of parking around the complex is very even. It's not stuck over in the corner where it's not going to be utilized and be problematic for the tenants as well. So it is distributed pretty well throughout the property. But at a 1.8 parking ratio, that's pretty well. That is a generous level of parking, but not overly so, but not under so as well.
In unit mix between mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms.
Yeah, I was going to point that out. Out of 268 units, 168 of them are either studio or 1 bedroom, 1 bath.
72% are 1 bedrooms.
Yeah, so it's going to be not a lot of families.
Not a lot of big families.
There's only 16 that are 3 bedroom, 2 bath.
You have the family, usually you have children. But when you have a 1 bedroom, 1 bath, you have 2 adults most of the time living there.
Still have 2 cars.
2 cars, yeah.
True.
Well, is there room for, because I'm thinking of those apartments not far from here, where if you have guests, they all have to park on the side of the road, because there's no extra parking. Is there extra parking for people if they have guests?
So the only, as proposed right now, the only regulated parking on site would be the carports. We are proposing some carports. It's not a significant number. Somewhere in the 60 to 70 range is what it would end up being total. Those would be reserved spaces, but the rest of it is open parking, and that's what I would expect. And that's the way our complexes operate from an extended standpoint moving forward. And what I would also say is at a 1.8 level of parking, that you're not going to have that from an overflow perspective as a general rule.
Okay, any further questions for the developers?
Maybe, how many, just in case people who live in those apartments are handicapped, how much handicap parking will you have available and how close to the building?
Every building is required to have some, and I believe it's 2% of total number off the top of my head.
The fire lanes that it will show as well. But fire lanes, it has handicap parking.
Oh, no.
2% of the overall spaces, and at each individual building, that there is handicap parking as well. And it is not uncommon if somebody needs a space closer from an accessibility standpoint, that can be dedicated for them as well. And with that, with a 1A plus level parking ratio, there is that availability to be able to do that as well.
Another question I had was, do we, and you may have touched on it and I missed it, but do you had kind of a comparison of the other apartment complexes in the area. Do you know how your pricing will compare to the other apartment complexes in the area?
More than likely, it's going to exceed it just because of the cost of building today. This is a market rate property, and it is what we would connotate as a Class A. Right now, from a market standpoint, I'm projecting rents at about mid-170s a square foot, which is an average of a little over $1,400 a month. From an average from San Antonio perspective, overall global market, not just Universal City, but outside of that, that is in line with, if slightly not under, what new product is coming online of this style and this finish out level. Due to the build costs of today, somebody coming much under that is very difficult to achieve without being subsidized in some fashion. And this is not subsidized in any part, it's a straight up market rate project. So from an economic perspective, that's about where we'll land. San Antonio has seen an incredible increase in the last 12 months. It is backing down, and that's a market as a whole. And when I say San Antonio, not which would include Universal City. We're down somewhere in 7 to 9%, depending on which reporting service you look at, on the 12-month year-over-year rental rate increase. We were at or slightly over 20% until about September. That is territory that, as a market whole, San Antonio and surrounding areas never sees. We typically are in a 3 to 4% range. Other markets in Texas do see that, but our cost of housing is significantly less in San Antonio and surrounding areas than other markets in Texas, because we don't see those typical double-digit rent growths. There's a fair amount of product under development in and around the overall San Antonio market, including in the surrounding area around Universal City. So rental rates the growth rate is tempering slightly, and depending on where construction costs are going. From a pro forma perspective right now, that's going to depend on when the project begins and where leasing is at. But from a timing standpoint, right now, from a leasing would be close to 2 years from now, roughly speaking. So depending on where that market is at, it may move up or down depending on what that market is.
Mainly, I wanted to, just thinking about, the military members we do have, obviously we'd love for them, if possible, to live in Universal City, live here, work here, and those kind of things. And then also a little bit touching on Mr. Duncan's question about crime, obviously, the higher the price, it's obviously a different clientele you're going for. And I'm just curious on that for a couple of those reasons.
And normal standard for apartments of this caliber is typically a financial means review check, and it's typically 3 times income, which is pretty standard across the industry. Some lower price point stuff, achieves stuff that's 2.5 times. But product at this level would be 3 times income at the market rate that it would be at the time.
Thank you.
I had one, and probably because I missed it in the introduction of everything, and it was also asked by one of the members here, who's going to manage the apartments?
It would be a third-party fee-based management company that would perform management.
Okay, but you all would own it then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we would own it through lease up and then for a period of time thereafter, and then it would potentially be sold at some point down the road.
Okay.
A product of this type, to that point, to address any concerns on that front, a product of this type will sell, depending on where the market is at that time, in the neighborhood of north of $50 million, roughly speaking. So this is not the type of apartment complex that you will see that is typically managed and held by your smaller mom and pop type entities. And those typically do not provide the capital resources put back into the property to maintain it at a certain level. A project of this size and scale and at this market price point wise, it is going to dictate that to go back in it, or you're not going to be able to maintain this. And investment level of that type, we don't see that in today's world with projects of this size and scale.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Yes, sir.
What about security on the premises? Are the gates, it's a gated community?
It is a
and
gated.
Will the management company be providing on-site security to?
That's typically not necessary, so
Okay.
no, as far as from a security guard type situation, no, that's not typically necessary or done. That would be very atypical. What is proposed with this development is a controlled gated access community on the vehicle gates and pedestrian gates in and out of the property to help with security from inside and outside of the property for our residents.
Did I miss, is there a back entrance? There is not going to be a back entrance out of the property, correct?
There is not. It only fronts to Pat Booker, so that's not even really an option with any development that I'm aware of.
And the gate would be over closer to the clubhouse, correct? Farther back off the road, so you're not having a line of traffic, putting in their coat,
Correct. So what you would see right now, it's still proposed on this plan, is this is where the two different vehicle gates entry left and right. And then there's also vehicle entry exit for resident only, typically that's with clicker type garage gate entry here, but it's also exit as well for that. So you're dividing that up around two different.
Just want to make sure, since there were traffic concerns, I think obviously that takes care of that to an extent.
You're dividing it up between the two.
Oh, I did have two questions. One was how much water does the retention pond actually hold, and what are the chances of it overflowing in the future?
So that's civil engineer is going to address some of that. I'm going to hit a couple high points on that front. Based off the square footage right now of it, it was asked earlier, it would be a earthened dry grass pond. So it is pervious cover. That water is going to be collected from what is on site, and actually this property does collect some water from Pat Booker Road. There are sawtooth curbs along Pat Booker Road, so we do take water from Pat Booker itself. So we're going to have to take that and do something with it. That water would be collected there and then allowed to go down the existing floodway through the green belt going downstream. That was obviously addressed by several residents as far as how that volume was. The intention of that, he can speak to the hydraulics of it from a overall high point perspective on that front. The size of that pond is dictated based off of what that volume is and certain rainfall rates to mitigate or prevent surrounding area flooding. And that should help with the surrounding concerns based off of some of the residents for the mobile home park as well. And what is done within our boundary, because that water has to be controlled on the exit as far as that goes. And then I'll hand off to the engineer for the more technical side of it.
So I'm Chris Kowalski with Pay Felson Engineers. Our address is 2000 Northwest Loop 410, San Antonio, Texas. So I guess just to answer your question about how much water can that pond hold, so it's roughly half an acre footprint right now, and typically those ponds will be anywhere between 5 and 6 feet tall. So it won't be 6 feet out of the ground, but it will be like a 5 or 6 foot deep hole in the ground. So when you look at that, it can hold roughly 3 acres of surface area, but there's an outfall structure that will probably be somewhere in this general vicinity that will be releasing water as it goes. So I really wouldn't expect it to hold more than like an acre of surface area of water at any one time. And then we're also required to build what's called an overflow weir. So we're required to design for the 525 and 100-year storms. So if there's a storm that's greater than the 100-year, which is a 1% chance of every year of that happening, we have to design what's called an overflow weir, which can pass that entire 100-year storm in the event of the basin being clogged. So that basin could pass a 200-year storm, so a 0.5% chance essentially every year of that happening. So hopefully that answered your question.
And right now, the thing I would put in my terms too is that with the structure of that earthen basin and the structures that would feed that water downstream, the water coming off-site, that's gonna be collected based off of the storm sewer improvements that are on the entire site, would go into that pond and then would be released in a controlled fashion, where right now, all of the water that's on site is uncontrolled. It's hopefully finding its way into that drainage and then off. This would obviously be within a controlled system under the engineering calculations that would hopefully mitigate that. And it would be in a much more controlled fashion based off of what the rates are that they use.
I had a quick question. You mentioned how deep is that gonna be?
It's going to depend on the calculations. I don't have an exact number now, but typically they're between 5 and 6 feet deep.
Okay, is it gonna be fenced to keep the kids out of it?
It would absolutely have to be fenced.
Okay.
And I guess a final question is, what will be done to mitigate, the impact on the residents while construction's underway? Are they gonna build a fence first around the property, or just concerned about noise and dust and?
Understood. I mean, there is some of that. I would imagine there's typically parameters as to when construction activities can happen. That's fairly normal. And there would be temporary cyclone fence at a minimum inside of our property line. Existing things, if it's outside of our property, obviously we can't affect that, but that would be done throughout construction, and then toward the end, as things are finishing, is when the proposed fence types and heights would be put in from a permanent perspective. So it would be fenced during construction, and the permanent fences would go in toward the end. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Piggyback off of that, obviously there's the design built-in buffer between the apartment and the residential around it. Would that buffer be, I guess, would you follow the same buffer during construction to keep, heavy equipment and some of that stuff, or would that be something where you could be parking large vehicles or things like that closer to the?
I'm following with you. So some of it would need to be cleared selectively, obviously, just from a cleaned up perspective. We're trying to keep all of those, the trees that are on that one exhibit on the perimeters intact, but it is gonna obviously have to be cleaned up. Generally speaking, several of those runs include surrounding utility easements and facilities. So obviously improvements, number one, can't go over that. And number two, that would limit activity on or over that due to obviously impacting those significantly. So there wouldn't be an extensive amount of activity in that. Primarily what it's going to be done would be initially cleared, and then throughout the construction cycle, not a lot of activity would happen within those associated with that. And then toward the end, it would be final landscaping, cleaning up, fencing type work that would happen within that. And that's generally speaking within that cover, that's what you're going to see.
Right. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? All right, I'm going to close the public hearing at this time. Thank you all for your presentation, and thank the members of the community for their comments. At this point, we need to, as a committee, we need to consider the amendment to the future land use plan to change this location from CS plus O commercial services overlay to HD high density residential. So what we're working on right now is the change to the future land use plan. I'd like to first ask for a motion, and just for your information, for the information of everybody here, all our motions are made in the affirmative, regardless of how we intend to vote. The motion will be in the affirmative, so it's clear whether we're voting for or against the motion. So I'm asking for a motion, and then we'll consider it after we get the motion. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I motion to approve the FLUP PZ 560 ZC 231 after conducting a public hearing on the request for an amendment to the future land use plan for the property at at 2902 Pat Hooker Road. The Planning and Zoning Commission has considered the request and moves to approve PC 560, ZC 231, and the amendment to the future land use plan from CS+O Commercial Services and Overlay to HDR High Density Residential for the property at 2902 Pat Hooker Road with the following conditions. 1, City Council approval of the zone change from C3 to Commercial Services to PUD District 2023-101 District. 2, City Council approval of the final PUD final plan. And 3, Planning and Zoning Commission approval of the preliminary and final plats of the subdivision within 2 years of PUD final plan approval by City Council.
I second.
And I have a second. Okay, do we have any discussion among the members of the committee?
Just because it's still relatively new for me. The way you worded that, that means that the amendment to the future land use plan is dependent on this thing going through, correct? So if this PUD doesn't get approved and built, then that change to the future land use goes away.
Correct, we're trying to tie it all together.
Got it. Okay, just wanted to make sure I understood.
Okay. And is there further discussion?
And that was Mr. Young, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and that was kind of addressing what your concern, I think, was opening the door to this,
Yes.
becoming a, so just to kind of.
Because in retrospect, it's, they buy it and they set it up and then he sells it
Right.
in 3 years.
Right, so to address that,
Change.
and I apologize, yeah, so it is tied to this specific,
Okay.
so just to kind of address that for
One of the
everyone.
main purposes of the PUD process.
Yeah, wouldn't be allowed to continue,
Okay,
have to be reapproved.
if there is no further discussion, like Mr. Casada, could we have a vote on the motion to approve as stated by Mr. Hudson?
Commissioner Hudson.
Aye.
Commissioner Andrews.
Aye.
Commissioner Carlson.
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia.
Aye.
Commissioner Hernandez.
Aye.
Commissioner Spurlock.
Aye.
Commissioner Villa.
Aye.
Commissioner Woods.
Aye.
Chair Jackson.
Aye.
Motion is approved.
Okay, that brings us to our second step, which is the actual zone change, changing the zoning of that property. And we'll be considering changing the zone from C3 Commercial Services to the special zoning, the PUD 2023-101. So it is an actual zoning change. So let's open the public hearing on that discussion. Does anybody, any members of the public care to address this zoning change?
Sorry.
Okay, there being no public comments that I see. I'm going to close the public hearing and go on to consideration by the committee. I need a motion for the zoning change. Mr. Hudson, you're on a roll, you want to do it?
Why not? As long as the cough drop's working, I'm good. Motion to approve zone change PC 561, ZC 232. After conducting a public hearing on a request for a zone change for the property at 2902 Pat Hooker Road, Planning and Zoning Commission has considered the request and moves to recommend approval of PC 561, ZC 232, and the zone change from C3 Commercial Services to PUD 2023-101 District for the property at 2902 Pat Hooker Road with the following conditions. 1, City Council approval of the FLUP amendment from CS+O Commercial Services and overlay to HDR High Density Residential. 2, City Council approval of the final PUD plan. 3, Planning and Zoning Commission approval of the preliminary and final plats of the subdivision within 2 years of PUD final plan approval by City Council.
It's the same protections that we addressed earlier.
I'll second that.
And did we get a second?
Second over there. Yes.
All right, discussion. Any discussion on this zoning change from members of the commission? There being Hearing none, let's have a vote, please, Mr. Casson.
Commissioner Hudson?
Aye.
Commissioner Carlson?
Aye.
Commissioner Andrews?
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia?
Aye.
Commissioner Hernandez?
Aye.
Commissioner Spurlock?
Aye.
Commissioner Villa?
Aye.
Commissioner Woods?
Aye.
Chair Jackson?
Aye.
Motion is approved.
Okay, that brings us to the third step, which is the, basically to decide whether or not the proposal that we have here meets the standards for a PUD established, I guess, by the city. Again, we have a public hearing. I'm going to open the public hearing. Would any members of the public care to address this issue?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just a little,
Sure. Go ahead, Mr. Young.
you're a little curious. I was just wondering, he had a very good plan. I listened to it and everything. But I'm thinking about a lot of it, like I asked the question, when did you take the assessment or whatever? The assessment. When was it? Because it's like, basically I wasn't answered. Depending on when you took it, you're working off a lot of what ifs and does this happen and we'll do this and what could be, which is valid, but there need to be, I feel like there need to be more definite when you're doing something that you, and that's all. It's just curious.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just
Speak, sir.
That's all I wanted.
Please go forward and give your name and address, please.
Charles May, 13415 Muses, Universal City. Just because I don't see it on this particular drawing, does this include sidewalks along that road?
Yes, it does.
I just wanted to make sure that was included, because it would be horrible to go that far without
Traffic
sidewalks.
study here addresses the 10-foot sidewalk that exists and then says TxDOT may require it to be changed. Basically what it said. Okay, thank you.
So is anyone going to answer this
I was
question?
gonna say.
Yeah, I can address that, and the traffic engineer can jump in, but generally, when they do a traffic analysis, they look at it, they take into account the school season, right? And so, I believe in this one, they did it at 2 different times. One was in the springtime, when kids were in session, the other time was in June. But they have a formula to account for that time of the year, to factor in as though it were a school season.
When does TxDOT make its decision on the
That's a good
access?
question. When does TxDOT, when does CPS make decisions? It seems to take forever, which is why they entered into discussions early on with both of those entities, because they know that there's a certain amount of lead time for TxDOT and CPS to make those decisions. So both of them have to review the plat of subdivision. And so, again, that is why it's only at a preliminary stage, because they only look at it from a preliminary standpoint. Now, if they receive the zoning entitlements, the approvals, TxDOT will come to a firm decision.
If TxDOT makes changes to the access or the right in, right out, or traffic lights or whatever, does that become part of the PUD?
Yes, it will.
Can we discuss that again?
No, that's a TxDOT decision.
Yeah, so we've written it so that there are 2 proposed curb cuts, so it may vary a little based, the exact location, but at a maximum, they're not gonna allow for 3 curb cuts, we know that. So if they do allow for 2, which is being proposed, then it's already accommodated within the site plan.
All right, I'm going to close the public hearing on the request for approval. Mr. Casada, do you want to say anything about the findings of fact and such that are listed in here? Is there anything we need to consider on this?
Just to point out, and I think I put this in the staff memo, so the standards are part of the overall PUD ordinance that was adopted by City Council a few years ago. And so every PUD that comes through has to address those standards. And so the applicant has to provide responses to those. The red line in your standards packet, that is where staff reviewed it and thought that some additional information was needed. And so that accounts for the red line.
So the finding of fact were provided by the developer.
Correct.
And the red with additions are from the city,
Right.
city staff.
Correct.
Okay? We can all review those if you haven't already reviewed them. I think that they all cover the same information that we've been presented here. Do we have any discussion among the members of the commission about this? So first I need to have a motion. Back up. Again, we need to have a motion to approve the PUD. To approve the PUD. Erica, what we need is a motion to request the approval of the PUD preliminary and final plans for this project. Could I get a motion, please, from someone?
I'll take it.
All right.
It's a marathon, I was hoping somebody would overrule. Motion to approve PUD preliminary and final plans, PC 562 ZC 233. Per section 4-5-56 of the zoning code, no PUD preliminary and final plans shall be recommended for approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission unless said plans have met with the procedural process requirements outlined for preliminary and final plans. As such, the Planning and Zoning Commission has made findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the public hearing to support the conclusions identified in section 4-5-56 parentheses 6 of the zoning code. Determine that the PUD final plan is in substantial conformity with the approved PUD preliminary plan, which in this case are one and the same. Determine that the PUD final plan complies with any and all conditions imposed by approval of the PUD preliminary plan. Determine that the PUD final plan complies with the provisions of the PUD zoning ordinance and all other applicable federal, state, and city codes, ordinances, regulations, and other applicable laws. Specify that the reason for a recommendation of approval is due to the fact that the PUD final plan is designed to accommodate multifamily residential and related uses that will allow flexibility in order to achieve a higher and better use not otherwise afforded via traditional zoning. Provided recommended limitations or conditions as identified in the following section of this motion. Therefore, in conclusion, as a separate statement from the findings of fact, I move to recommend approval of PC 562 ZC 233 and the associated PUD preliminary and final plans for the property at 2902 Pat Booker Road with the following conditions. 1. City Council approval of the FLUP amendment from CS plus O commercial services and overlay to HDR high density residential. 2. City Council approval of the zone change from C3 commercial services to PUD to 2022-101 district. And 3. Planning and Zoning Commission approval of the preliminary and final plats of subdivision within 2 years of PUD final plan approval by City Council.
Second. Okay, any discussion among the members of the committee? And can we have a vote, please, Mr. Casada?
Commissioner Carlson.
Aye.
Commissioner Hudson.
Aye.
Commissioner Andrews.
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia.
Aye.
Commissioner Hernandez.
Aye.
Commissioner Spurlock.
Aye.
Commissioner Villa.
Aye.
Commissioner Woods.
Aye.
Chair Jackson.
Aye.
Motion is approved.
Okay, that brings us to our last item, which is a public meeting on the request for the approval of the preliminary plat. As Mr. Casada has mentioned, this is not a final, they will not go with a final plat because they're still missing inputs from TxDOT among others. That will be considered at a later meeting. But the preliminary plat of the subdivision is as indicated in your packet. I'm going to open the public meeting. Does anyone from the public have any discussion on this preliminary plat of the subdivision? Sir.
Bill Duncan here. I've walked probably half that property. I have an old car, somebody who lives in parts.
Yeah.
And it's not flat by any means of imagination. And the previous owner dug a trench, probably 6 feet wide, from just past the grass all the way down this way, probably about half that property, to take in stormwater off the road, I guess, or whatever. And now you're going to take away like I'd say more than half the property, you just take all the roads and put it in place. I'm still concerned, I don't know if there's a drainage ditch that goes down this way. Now, it's not gonna affect me, hopefully, depending on how far down they go on this backside. And he said that it's all gonna go down storm drainage and then go over to the retention pond. As long as they're not gonna build higher, and if they go down lower, then it won't affect probably me, but it's gonna affect, if they're taking in, he said they're taking in water from Pat Brooker. If you've ever drove down Pat Brooker when it's raining, that water comes straight into the park. Goes halfway down the park and comes down the backside. And then goes over to the ditch on the far corner over here on this side. So, if he's gonna be taking in water, that'd be great for probably the park. But then it's gonna come down this way, depending if they're gonna build up or down, and go to the retention pond, and then go out. This is only, he said, 3 acres. This is almost 14 acres. It's 5 feet deep, I understand that. I'm still worried about that part. If there's no drainage ditch here, that's gonna run off. As you said, the 100-year flood, I haven't really seen it, but like I said, my place is flooded 3 times before. Now they did, over here where the water pond, they built more dirt up on the other side, so that stopped that. So great, no problem. But I'm still concerned about the drain, that's all.
So I'll address that one more time, just from a higher level. So as part of the construction plans, the engineering plans, there is an engineering study that's conducted that will identify the capacity required and accommodate for that capacity to funnel the stormwater runoff. That will then channel it from the site down to, again, this area here, the retention pond. And then it will release it at a certain rate, which is determined by the engineers and the engineer study, into this existing drainage area that flows that way.
So there is a drainage ditch there?
There is capacity, correct.
I just never seen it, that's all.
It's just the same ditch that it drains into right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, they will, the engineering study will put together all those calculations, and that's how they design that study to make sure that they can accommodate all of that additional rainwater that comes on the site.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Casella.
I did have a question. Should be pretty quick.
Have your name and address, please?
My name is Savannah. My address is not here, but I manage the mobile home park next to us.
Okay.
I am just concerned, or maybe not so much concerned, but I'm not sure if utility tap-ins are going to affect any of the surrounding residential areas when they go in to install, sewer, water, that sort of thing.
Sure. So I can address that.
Okay.
If you want to jump in, let me know. So again, as part of the engineering study and as part of the negotiations or work with CPS, they determine to make sure that they have capacity and that they're not disrupting existing electrical use. They can accommodate the additional loads.
Okay.
Okay.
And sewer, water, I'm assuming will be on its own.
Same thing.
Okay.
So they will conduct an engineering study in coordination with Public Works as well as the city's consulting engineer, who will make sure that there's adequate size piping to accommodate the water sewer flow within the site, and then also discharging to the larger community.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I didn't put my name up there.
That's all right. Can you have your name and address, please?
My name's Quinn Elliott. I'm in 8711 Stony Brook, which is this one right there. There is no drainage ditch right here. It starts right here. This is a hillside. There is a culvert right there because they came through and they put a sewer system in. Why is the detention pond not access the sewer? Why is it allowed to go down a hillside, I don't know, 100 feet before it hits the creek?
Yeah, so.
Because if something happens,
So they can't put a
I
structure.
may have to get flood insurance.
They can't put a structure off their site. So again, through the engineering study, this is their lot line.
Yeah,
so
but
they
there's a
can't build
sewer
there.
right here.
Yeah, so Public Works and Engineering will ensure that the flow
Goes down the creek.
Goes down the creek.
All right. All right, if there are no other public comments, we'll close the public meeting at this time. And move on to have the commission consider the approval of the preliminary plat for this subdivision. Could I get a motion on the approval of the preliminary plat?
Motion to approve preliminary plat of subdivision PC 567. After conducting a public meeting on the request for approval of the preliminary plat of subdivision for the property at 2902 Pat Booker Road, the Planning and Zoning Commission has considered the request and moves to approve PC 567 and the preliminary plat of subdivision with the following conditions. 1, City Council approval of the FLUP amendment from CS+O Commercial Services and overlay to HDR High Density Residential. 2, City Council approval of the zone change from C3 Commercial Services to PUD 2022-101 District. And 3, City Council approval of the PUD final plan.
Second. Is there further discussion among the members of the committee?
Is it, Michael, I don't know if this is out of order. I actually, at Clemens High School where I work, there is a right-in only and right-out only exit. And I have the satellite view of it here. Is that something I can show to the members of the?
Do you have an address?
For the,
for that location?
Yes.
I can pull it up on.
Oh, sure. 1001 El Bell Road. Just because I know multiple members had questions about how that works and what that looks like, and it may clear that issue up.
The Rotoma Ranch Apartments has a ingress egress left, right on Pat Booker Road, and then on the frontage road, they have a right in, right out.
1001 El Bell, E-L-B-E-L.
Insurance?
Yes.
The Sonic on Pat Booker Road also has a right in, right out. As does the
So if you
Valero.
go over, looks like that's outdated. Oh, wait, no, it's not. Okay, so under the baseball field over there,
So.
the road that runs out, yep, the end right there where you're pointing. If you zoom in, that is a right in only, maybe zoom one more time, and you can see there's a concrete, so there's concrete right in the center
And let me,
that sticks up.
Oops, hold on a second.
Nice.
Oh, you're good, Cassandra.
So there you go.
All right, way to go. I am
That's a good
impressed.
example of a right now. So anyone going this way can turn in, and they can only exit going that way. Anyone coming this way cannot turn in because of the design of the raised median.
And there's a sign that says no left turn.
Well, that as well, but something like this on the sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how many times did they took the sign down?
Right, so that's why these islands, the median, the pork chop that they design, it's to prevent people from, at a certain height, you're gonna damage the.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. I believe we need to have if there's no further consideration, we need to have a vote on the preliminary plat. Mr. Casella.
Commissioner Carlson.
Aye.
Commissioner Hudson.
Aye.
Commissioner Andrews.
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia.
Aye.
Commissioner Hernandez.
Aye.
Commissioner Spurlock. Commissioner Diaz. Commissioner Woods.
Aye.
Chair Jackson.
Aye.
Motion is approved.
One thing I hope you all noticed, this process is all one big package, and each step is contingent on the previous step. Everything has to be approved. It all has to be put in the ocean within 2 years, or it goes away and we start over. City Council will get this
Next week, Tuesday.
Yeah, next Tuesday,
Next Tuesday.
6:30.
This will be considered, the same items will be considered by the City Council. All right, that's all for that proposal. Do we have a city manager's report?
Just a couple of items. Happy New Year. And thank you for all the work that you do. I know this was a very big PUD process. We do have a few more coming up for you, so be prepared to be busy this year. Also with that, our annual accomplishment report will be coming out on the 17th, and we'll make sure that you get a copy of that, as well as everyone will get a copy on the website as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. That concludes all our business. The meeting is adjourned.
Yes, Mary.